I stood in the conference room on the 38th floor, and the air tasted like it always did.
Clean.
Sterile. The kind of artificial freshness that came from expensive purifiers working overtime to mask the scent of desperation that clung to every corner of Whitmore and Associates. 15 years I had been breathing that air. 15 years of learning how power moved through these halls like an invisible current, how deals were made not with handshakes but with silence, with the weight of unspoken understanding between people who controlled more money than most would see in 10 lifetimes. My title was Director of Executive Partnerships. To anyone outside this world, it sounded bureaucratic, meaningless. But to the people who actually mattered, the ones who signed the checks that could build hospitals or destroy entire neighborhoods with a single rezoning decision, my title meant I held the keys. I didn't raise my voice. I never needed to. My power lived in the pause before someone signed a document, in the nod I gave across a polished table, in the $4.2 billion acquisition I had spent the last 11 months carefully constructing from nothing but raw data and 3 different companies that hated each other. I was standing by the massive windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, reviewing the final contract clauses on my tablet, when the door didn't just open. It exploded inward. The woman who entered wasn't walking. She was performing. Her heels struck the hardwood floor like drumbeats announcing royalty. Madison, 23 years old. Fresh MBA from a school her father's donation had probably built a wing for. She wore confidence like cheap perfume, and she looked at everyone in the office like we were extras in a movie where she played the lead role. It was her first day. Her first hour, actually. "Excuse me," her voice cut through the low hum of the office like a blade. She wasn't looking at the skyline.
She was looking at me.
Or more specifically, she was looking at my chest with an expression of pure disgust. I lowered my tablet slowly, turning to face her with the practiced calm I reserved for volatile investors and difficult clients. "Can I help you, Madison?" "I'm Jennifer," I started to say, but she cut me off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I know who you are," she said, holding up a thick spiral-bound book. The employee handbook. The relic from 2009 that nobody had opened since smartphones became standard issue. "And I know what you're doing." I blinked. "Reviewing the merger documentation for the Whitmore deal?"
No.
She stepped closer. The scent of her perfume was overwhelming, jasmine mixed with something trying too hard to smell expensive. "You are violating Code 7, Section C, regarding professional appearance standards for client-facing personnel." I looked down at myself. I was wearing a tailored Donna Karan blazer in charcoal gray, paired with black slacks that had been custom-fitted. My bag was Italian leather, worn soft from years of use. This was the uniform of someone who closed deals worth more than small countries. "The buttons," Madison said, tapping the handbook with a manicured fingernail. "Decorative closures are explicitly prohibited. Standard black buttons only." She looked at my bag with even more contempt. "And that bag looks old. We represent excellence here. Not vintage thrift store chic." The entire floor had gone silent. Through the glass walls, I could see junior analysts frozen at their desks, coffee cups halfway to their mouths. Assistants had stopped typing mid-sentence. Everyone was watching. This is the part where I should probably mention that if you enjoy watching disasters unfold in real time, if you love stories about people who make terrible decisions and then have to live with the consequences, you might want to stay for what comes next. Because what Madison didn't understand, what she couldn't possibly comprehend with her brand new degree and her father's job title protecting her like armor, was that she had just lit a fuse on something that would destroy everything she thought she controlled. "Madison," I said, my voice dropping lower, the tone I used when I needed someone to understand they were making a mistake. "I have a meeting with Richard Whitmore in exactly 46 hours to finalize a $4.2 billion acquisition. My buttons are not the issue here. The issue is that you are interrupting critical preparation for." Her face flushed red, clashing with the pink scarf knotted around her neck. "I am the Vice President's Executive Liaison," she announced, using a title that I knew didn't officially exist at her pay grade. "I am responsible for maintaining corporate standards. If you can't follow basic dress code policies, how can we trust you with the future of this company?" It was so absurd, I almost laughed. But I saw something flicker in her eyes. A hunger. She didn't care about buttons. She wanted blood. She wanted to prove on her very first day that she was dangerous, that she could take down someone established, someone with power. Taking down the alpha, that's how you establish dominance in a pack. She had chosen me because I looked untouchable, and destroying the untouchable sends a message. Go home, Madison commanded, crossing her arms. Change into appropriate attire. Submit a written apology to Human Resources for this infraction. I expect it on my desk by end of business today. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the slight tremor in her hands despite her bravado. I saw the desperate need for validation from people who would never give it to her. I also saw the complete and utter lack of understanding about what I actually did for this company. No, I said simply. Excuse me?
No.
I have work to do. I turned back toward the window. You're fired, she shrieked. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Heavy. Impossible to take back. I turned around slowly. She was breathing hard, eyes wide. She had committed. She had pulled the trigger without knowing what she was shooting at. You can't be serious, I said. Not pleading. Analyzing. I am your superior by organizational hierarchy and you are being insubordinate, she said, her voice cracking slightly on the last word. Pack your things. Security will escort you out immediately. I looked past her at the terrified faces of my team through the glass. I looked down at the $4.2 billion contract on my tablet screen. And then something strange happened. A wave of cold clarity washed through me. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel devastated. I felt free. Okay, I said. Madison blinked. She had expected a fight. She had expected begging, tears, threats. Okay, you're absolutely right, Madison, I said, closing the cover of my tablet with a soft click. Standards matter. I'll collect my things immediately. I didn't wait for her response. I walked past her, close enough that my shoulder nearly brushed hers, and headed toward my office. She stood there confused by my compliance, probably wondering why the victory felt so hollow, so incomplete. What Madison didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know because she had never actually read anything except the handbook, was that she had just fired the only person in this hemisphere who could speak the language of the Whitmore family. She had just pulled the pin on a grenade, and she wouldn't even hear the explosion until it was far too late. My office was different from the sterile minimalism of the conference room. My desk was covered with files, legal pads filled with handwritten notes in a shorthand only I understood, and sitting in the corner was an old leather address book that was probably worth more than the entire digital server system this company relied on. Madison probably thought everything was backed up in the cloud. She didn't understand that in the world of billion-dollar deals, the real agreements were made with personal cell phone numbers scribbled on cocktail napkins, with trust built over decades, with connections that couldn't be downloaded or hacked or transferred. I didn't rush. Rushing implied panic, and I felt nothing close to panic. I opened my desk drawers with the slow precision of someone defusing a bomb. First, the personal items. The photograph of my mother, who taught me that dignity costs nothing, but is worth everything. The crystal pen holder Richard Whitmore had given me after we closed the Singapore deal 6 years ago. And then, carefully, I lifted the address book and placed it in my worn leather bag. It landed with a satisfying weight. My assistant, Rebecca, appeared in the doorway. She was pale, her hands twisting a tissue into shreds. Jennifer, she whispered like speaking too loud might summon demons. Is it true? Did she really? It's true, Rebecca, I said softly. I picked up a stack of files. The preliminary assessments for the Whitmore merger. I held them for a long moment, feeling their weight. These were company property. Technically, they belonged here. I set them back down in the exact center of my desk. But the merger, Rebecca stammered. The meeting is in 2 days. Nobody else knows about the Montana property clause. Nobody else knows about the family legacy provisions in Appendix 9. I'm sure Madison is very capable, I said. The lie tasted sweet on my tongue. She has an MBA, Rebecca. She reads handbooks. I cleared my browser history. I logged out of the encrypted server. I erased my local cache. I wasn't destroying anything. I was simply removing my fingerprints from the architecture. If they wanted to navigate this deal, they would have to use the maps they had on file, not the shortcuts I carried in my head. I put on my coat, soft cashmere against the aggressive air conditioning, and picked up my bag. When I walked out of my office, the entire floor was performing an elaborate pantomime of working. Heads down, eyes darting. The silence was the sound of a crew watching their captain get thrown overboard by someone who didn't know how to read a compass. Madison was waiting by the elevators, arms crossed, flanked by two security guards who both knew my name, who had worked with me for years. "Check her bag," Madison snapped at them. "Make sure she didn't steal any proprietary information." Frank, the head of security, looked at me with apologetic eyes. He had 3 kids. I had helped him get his oldest into a good college with a reference letter. "She's clear, Miss Madison," Frank said without even glancing at my bag. Madison huffed.
Fine.
"Just get her out of here. I want this negativity off my floor." I pressed the elevator button and waited. When the door slid open with a gentle chime, I turned to face Madison one last time. She was bracing herself for anger, for threats, for a dramatic final speech. Instead, I smiled. It was genuine. The kind of smile you give someone who has just handed you a winning lottery ticket while thinking they were giving you a parking violation. "Thank you, Madison," I said. Her eyebrows drew together in confusion. "What?" "For clarifying the priorities of this organization," I said. "It's been very educational. Good luck with the merger. The appendices are tricky." I stepped into the elevator. "What appendices?" Madison demanded, taking a step forward as the doors began to close. "The file is complete." I saw the digital version. "Digital files are so impersonal," I said softly. The door shut, cutting off her face just as understanding started to dawn in her eyes. As the elevator descended, I felt gravity pulling in my stomach, but my spirit was soaring. I checked my watch. 10:45 in the morning. By noon, the legal department would start asking questions. By 2 o'clock, the partners would be confused. By tomorrow morning, they would be bleeding. I walked out of the building into bright sunshine that felt like it was welcoming me into a new world. I didn't hail a taxi. I walked 3 blocks to a quiet cafe with outdoor seating. I ordered a double espresso and sat by the window where I could see people rushing past, caught in their own dramas, their own struggles. I took my phone out of my bag and turned it completely off. Let them sit in silence for a while. Let them wonder. Let them panic. I spent the afternoon at a small art museum I had always meant to visit, but never had time for. I stared at impressionist paintings, at colors bleeding into each other, at beauty captured in chaos. It was remarkable how much you missed when you spent 15 years carrying the weight of $1 billion corporation on your shoulders. For the first time in over a decade, I noticed texture. I noticed light. I noticed the silence inside my own mind. It wasn't until 6 o'clock in the evening, sitting in my apartment with a glass of wine, that I decided to turn my phone back on. It vibrated in my hand like an angry insect. The screen lit up with an avalanche of notifications that didn't stop for nearly 3 full minutes. 18 missed calls. 34 new emails. Text messages that formed a digital scream of regret. I took a slow sip of wine and scrolled through the messages from Rebecca. 11:30 a.m. Jennifer, legal is asking who authorized your termination. Madison locked herself in her office. Nobody knows what to do. 1:15 p.m. The Tokyo partners tried to call you. Madison took the call. She told them you were no longer with the company due to performance issues. There was yelling. A lot of yelling. In Japanese and English. 2:45 p.m. Where are the appendix files? Madison is screaming at IT. They're saying the files don't exist on the server. Jennifer, everyone is completely panicking. I smiled, swirling the wine in my glass. Of course the files didn't exist on the server. The appendices weren't documents. They were understandings. They were the handshake agreements I had made with Richard Whitmore about preserving his grandfather's legacy in the Montana property. They were the verbal promises about keeping certain executive teams intact. They were in my handwritten notes, which were currently sitting in my fireplace turning to ash. I opened an email from the general counsel, David Thornton. He was a good man, but spineless when the board applied pressure. Subject: urgent, employment status clarification. Jennifer, there appears to have been a significant miscommunication regarding protocol enforcement this morning. Please call me immediately. We need to discuss reinstating your position before the Whitmore meeting. We can resolve this situation. Madison is new and perhaps overly enthusiastic about procedures. Let's not allow emotions to derail this merger. Emotions. I whispered the word to my empty apartment. They always called it emotions when a woman reacted to being wronged. But when a man made a calculated decision, they called it strategy. I didn't reply. I could picture the scene perfectly. The sun would be setting over the city, casting long shadows across the 38th floor. Madison would be exhausted, her expensive perfume turning sour with sweat, her perfect outfit wrinkled. She would be realizing that being the vice president's daughter was a title that commanded fear, but not respect. Certainly not knowledge. She had the files. She could see the numbers. She could see the $4.2 billion valuation.
But she didn't know why.
She didn't know that Clause 17 in Section 8, the one about environmental remediation costs on the Montana property, was actually a coded negotiation about a specific piece of land that Richard Whitmore's grandfather had purchased in 1947. On paper, it looked like a liability. To the Whitmore family, it was sacred ground. If Madison tried to renegotiate that clause to save money, which any MBA graduate would do, she would insult Richard so deeply that he would walk away before she finished her first sentence. I sat on my couch and pulled a blanket over my legs. The city lights twinkled outside my window, indifferent to the panic happening in the glass tower downtown. Another text came through. This one was from a number I didn't have saved, but I recognized the area code. It was the private line of our CFO. 7:20 p.m. Jennifer, answer your phone. Name your price. We'll pay anything. I looked at the message for a long time. Name your price. My price wasn't money. My price was dignity. And unfortunately for them, dignity was a currency they had just declared worthless. I set the phone face down on the coffee table. I wasn't going to save them. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Tonight, I was going to watch a movie. Something about a disaster. Something about a woman who walks away while everything burns behind her. The panic was quiet from where I sat. But I knew that by tomorrow morning, it would be screaming. There is a drawer in my home office that stays locked. It doesn't contain jewelry or cash or anything valuable in the traditional sense. It contains something far more precious. Leverage. I walked to my antique writing desk in the corner of the living room and retrieved a small brass key from underneath a potted plant. The lock clicked open with a satisfying mechanical sound. Inside, resting on burgundy velvet lining, was a single leather portfolio. It was old, the edges soft from handling, smelling of paper and time. Embossed on the front in faded gold lettering were the words, Legacy Protocol, Whitmore Family Trust. Most people thought I was hired by Whitmore and Associates because of my impressive resume. The truth was more complicated. I came with the deal. 7 years ago, when Richard Whitmore first considered allowing outside investment into his family's empire, he had one non-negotiable condition. He wanted someone who understood old money. Not the flashy, loud wealth of tech startups, but the quiet, careful wealth that thinks in generations instead of quarters. My father had been Richard's father's attorney. I grew up playing in the library of the Whitmore estate while the adults discussed trust funds and legacy planning over scotch and cigars. I wasn't just an employee to Richard. I was a bridge. I was the translator between the ruthless capitalism of modern business and the old-world values of his family. I opened the portfolio. Inside was a single card with a phone number written in fountain pen. It wasn't a business line. It was the number to the phone Richard kept in his jacket pocket at all times. I sat there for a long time, tracing the numbers with my finger. Calling this number would violate every confidentiality agreement I had ever signed. It would be considered professional betrayal by anyone in the industry. It could destroy my career. But then I remembered Madison's face. I remembered the contempt in her eyes when she looked at my buttons. I remembered the cruel satisfaction when she screamed that I was fired in front of people I had mentored for years. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number. It rang twice. "This is Richard." The voice was deep, familiar, instantly comforting. "It's Jennifer," I said. There was a pause. A shift in the atmosphere. "I thought we were in quiet period until the signing on Friday," he said. "We were," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But circumstances have changed." "Changed how?" The warmth drained from his voice, replaced by the steel of a man who had built shipping empires. "I've been terminated," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. It stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Terminated," he finally repeated, like the word was foreign. "By whom?" "By the new vice president's executive liaison." "A dress code violation. Cultural misalignment." "A dress code violation," Richard said flatly. "Yes." "And who is managing the transition of the Montana provisions?" "Nobody," I said. "Madison believes the files on the server are sufficient." I heard a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a growl. "The files on the server list the Montana property as a non-performing asset. Without your documentation, their algorithm will flag it for liquidation within 6 months." "Correct," I said. "So they fired the only person who knows where the bodies are buried, and they did it 2 days before the biggest merger in their company's history." "That appears to be the situation." "Jennifer," Richard said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "are you free for breakfast tomorrow?"
I'm unemployed, Richard.
"I'm free all week."
Good.
"Meet me at the Carlisle Hotel. 8 a.m. And Jennifer?" "Yes. Don't sign anything with them. Not a severance package. Not an NDA. Nothing." "I wouldn't dream of it," I said. I hung up the phone. My heart was pounding like a war drum. I had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I wasn't just a fired employee anymore. I was an active participant in what was coming next. I closed the leather portfolio and locked the drawer. My apartment felt different now. It wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a command center. The Carlisle Hotel served breakfast with the kind of hushed elegance that made you feel like you were planning something significant, which in a way, we were. Richard Whitmore looked exactly as he always did. Impeccable in a navy suit, silver hair perfectly styled, eyes that had seen everything and were impressed by nothing. We didn't discuss the weather. We didn't discuss the food. "They called my office this morning," Richard said, spreading butter on toast with surgical precision.
Oh.
I sipped my tea.
Yes.
"A woman named Madison." She sounded frantic. Richard paused, the hint of amusement in his eyes. "She told my attorney that you were unavailable due to a sudden medical emergency. She claimed you were hospitalized with exhaustion, but had fully briefed her on all deal terms." I set my cup down carefully. The audacity was breathtaking. It wasn't just a lie. It was a verifiable, dangerous lie that could trigger legal clauses in the contract. "She's trying to buy time," I said. "She thinks if she can get you in a room, she can charm her way through the Montana clauses." "She thinks I'm an idiot," Richard corrected. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "My team did some research. Apparently Human Resources wasn't notified of your termination until this morning. The CFO is reportedly having a breakdown." "That sounds like Gerald," I noted. "Here's the situation, Jennifer." Richard leaned forward. "I don't do business with amateurs, and I certainly don't do business with liars. The deal with Whitmore and Associates is dead. I'm going to kill him myself." He paused. "But I still need to sell, and I still want you to manage the transition." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. It wasn't a merger agreement.
It was an employment contract.
"My holding company needs a director of strategic acquisitions. The salary is triple what you were making. The equity package is substantial. Your first assignment is to help me find a new buyer for my company." I looked at the contract. It was freedom. It was power. It was revenge served on a silver platter. "There's just one thing," Richard added, a predatory smile crossing his face. I haven't canceled my meeting at your old office yet. It's scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Why not? I asked. Because I want to see her face when she tries to explain why the hospitalized liaison is sitting across the table from her.
He leaned back.
I want you in the lobby when I arrive. I want you to be the last thing she sees before her world collapses. My phone buzzed on the table. An automated alert. My access credentials to the Whitmore and Associates server had been officially revoked. But then a second alert. A news notification. Merger rumors swirl as Whitmore and Associates faces internal disruption. The leak had started. The sharks were circling. I accept, I said, picking up the pen. Good, Richard said. Now finish your breakfast. You'll need your strength. Watching an empire crumble is exhausting work. Later that afternoon, I walked past the Whitmore and Associates building, staying on the opposite side of the street, hidden behind sunglasses. I could see activity on the 38th floor through the glass walls. People were pacing. Lights blazed. It looked like an anthill that had just been kicked. I checked my email. There was one final desperate message from Madison herself.
Jennifer, please call me. We can fix this.
I didn't mean it. It was stress. My father is asking questions.
Please.
I deleted it without reading it twice. There are no takebacks in the real world. Madison wanted to play with the adults. Now she could live with the consequences. The morning of the meeting, the sky was gray and threatening rain. It matched the mood I imagined permeated the executive suite across the street. I sat in a corner booth at Bruno's Coffee House, directly opposite the main entrance of the Whitmore and Associates Tower. It was 8:45. The meeting was at 9. I wasn't alone. Thomas, Richard's personal assistant, a man who looked like he had been carved from marble and dressed by experts, sat across from me with a briefcase. Richard is en route, Thomas said, checking his watch. He's currently 3 minutes away. He asked me to ensure you were visible. Visible? I asked. To the tower. Thomas gestured subtly toward the glass skyscraper across the street. I looked up. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the lobby were clear as crystal. And there, pacing back and forth near the security desk, was a figure in a cream-colored suit. Madison. She looked frantic, gesturing at receptionists, checking her phone constantly. She was trying to ensure everything was perfect for Richard's arrival. Then she stopped. She looked out the window, scanning the street casually at first. Then her gaze locked onto the coffee shop. The distance was maybe 60 yards, but I could see her freeze.
She saw me.
More importantly, she saw Thomas. Everyone in the industry knew Thomas. He was Richard Whitmore's shadow, his gatekeeper. And he was sitting with me, smiling, handing me documents. I watched Madison press her face against the glass. Her mouth opened in what must have been a shout. She grabbed her phone frantically. My phone stayed silent. I had blocked her number an hour ago. She sees us, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Excellent, Thomas said without turning around. Panic makes people sloppy, and Richard despises sloppiness. I watched her unravel in real time. She spun toward the receptionist, pointing at us, her mouth moving rapidly. The receptionist shook her head, looking terrified. Madison turned and ran toward the elevators, probably racing back to the 38th floor to warn someone. But warn them about what? That the woman she fired for wearing the wrong buttons was having coffee with the buyer's right-hand man? It was an admission of catastrophic failure, no matter how she framed it. She's running back upstairs, I reported. Thomas nodded. She's going to try to control the narrative. He gathered the papers. Too late. The narrative walked out of the building with you. He slid the documents across to me. You're officially employed, Jennifer. Welcome to Whitmore Holdings. And Richard? I asked. Pulling up now. I looked out the window. A sleek black car glided to the curb. The driver opened the door and Richard Whitmore stepped out, buttoning his jacket, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked up at the building with the expression of someone examining a condemned structure before demolition. He didn't look toward the coffee shop. He walked straight into the building. Showtime, Thomas whispered. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Madison would be racing down from the 38th floor, out of breath, panicking, trying to compose herself. She would meet him with lies, and he would meet her with truth. I waited. 1 minute. 5 minutes.
10.
The rain started to fall, blurring the windows, but I could still see everything perfectly. I paid for the coffee. I checked my reflection in the darkened window. My blazer was perfect. My leather bag hung from my shoulder. It was time to make an appearance. The lobby of the Whitmore and Associates building was designed to intimidate. 3 stories of polished marble, a waterfall feature that cost more than most houses, and acoustics designed to make every footstep echo. I pushed through the revolving doors, and the sound of the waterfall washed over me. The air was cold and sharp. The scene was exactly as I had imagined. Richard Whitmore stood in the center of the lobby near the security turnstiles. He wasn't moving toward the elevators. He was standing perfectly still like a statue. Madison was there, slightly disheveled. She must have taken the stairs because her perfect hair was coming loose. She looked panicked. She was flanked by Gerald the CFO and David from legal, both of whom looked like they wanted to disappear. I walked quietly across the marble floor. My heels clicked a steady rhythm that cut through the white noise of the fountain. I stopped about 20 feet away. Close enough to hear. Far enough to observe. There have been unforeseen complications, Madison was saying, her voice shrill and echoing off the hard surfaces. But, as I explained, Jennifer is indisposed. She's hospitalized. I didn't want to worry you with medical details. Richard stared at her, without blinking. Hospitalized, he repeated. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Yes, Madison nodded desperately. Very sudden. But she briefed me completely. I'm fully prepared to proceed with the signing. Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once. That's strange, Richard said calmly, because I just received a text from her. She says the coffee across the street was excellent. Madison froze. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like wax. Gerald's head snapped up. What? He croaked. Richard turned slightly, scanning the lobby. His eyes found me. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once. Madison turned. She saw me standing there. Healthy.
Calm.
Holding my bag. The hospitalized invalid. The silence that followed could have crushed steel. She, Madison stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. She's lying. She must have. I fired her. The truth vomited out before she could stop it. Gerald turned on Madison, his face purple. You did what? Richard looked back at Madison. His expression was pure disgust. You told my legal team she was sick. You lied to me, to my board, and to your own partners. And you fired the project lead 46 hours before closing because of... He looked me up and down. What exactly? Dress code violation, Madison shrieked, desperate and cornered. Her buttons.
Headache.
It's in the handbook. Richard laughed. It was a harsh, cutting sound. You fired the architect of a $4.2 billion deal over buttons. He turned to Gerald. Is this the leadership I'm investing in? Is this the judgment I'm trusting with my family's legacy? Mr. Whitmore, please. Gerald stepped forward, hands raised. This is a misunderstanding. Madison is new. We can bring Jennifer back immediately. With a raise. With a promotion. Richard raised a hand for silence. Can you? He turned to me. Jennifer, are you currently employed by this company? I stepped forward. No, Mr. Whitmore. My employment was terminated for cause on Tuesday morning. Then you have no authority to negotiate this merger. None whatsoever, I agreed. Richard turned back to the group. He looked at Madison, who was now trembling, tears starting to form in her eyes. Then there is no one here I trust to handle this transaction, Richard said. He signaled to Thomas, who was standing by the entrance. The meeting is cancelled. The deal is dead. You can't, Madison screamed. My father will sue. We have a binding term sheet. Term sheets are contingent on good faith and due diligence, Richard said, his voice ice cold. You've demonstrated neither. He turned and walked toward the exit. Good day. The moment the revolving door spun shut behind Richard Whitmore, the lobby erupted. It wasn't a physical explosion. It was psychological. The shock wave was just as destructive. Gerald, who had survived hostile takeovers and federal investigations, turned on Madison with a face like a bruised plum. "You fired her," he roared, his voice amplified by the lobby acoustics into thunder. "You fired the lead negotiator without consulting legal, without consulting the board." "She was insubordinate," Madison cried, shrinking against the security desk. "She disrespected me. I'm the VP's liaison." "You're a disaster," Gerald shouted, actually spitting. "Do you have any idea what you just did? That was $4.2 billion walking away. That was our stock price. That was my retirement." Security guards stared at their shoes. Receptionists pretended to type on blank screens. I stood there, an observer to the carnage. Madison looked around frantically for support. Her eyes landed on me. The hatred was pure, but mixed with terrifying realization. "This is your fault," she screamed at me. "You planned this. You sabotaged us." "I planned to wear a blazer," I said calmly. "You planned everything else, Madison." Gerald spun toward me. "Jennifer, please. Ignore her. She's suspended. Effective immediately." He glared at Madison. "Go to your father's office and wait there. Don't speak to anyone. If you so much as tweet about this, I will sue you personally." Madison let out a broken sob and ran toward the elevators, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. Gerald took a breath and turned a desperate smile toward me. "Jennifer, the damage is bad, but it's fixable. We can call Richard back. We'll say it's resolved. You're rehired. Senior VP. 30% raise. Stock options. Just pick up the phone and fix this." I looked at Gerald. I had worked for him for 10 years. He had never once asked about my family. He had never said thank you when I saved the quarter with clever negotiations. He only cared now because the ship was sinking. "I can't do that, Gerald." "Why not? Name your price. We'll triple it." "It's not about money," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. "What is that?" Gerald asked. "My formal acknowledgement of termination," I lied smoothly. "It was actually my employment contract with Whitmore Holdings, but he didn't need to know that." "You can't rehire me." "Why not?" "Because I've already accepted a new position." Gerald's face went slack.
Who?
"Who could possibly hire you this fast?" "The client," I said. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He actually staggered backward. You're working for Whitmore?" "As of this morning," I said. "I'm the director of strategic acquisitions." "Which means, Gerald, that if you want to salvage any part of this deal, maybe sell off pieces for scrap value, you'll be negotiating with me." I checked my watch. "But not today. Today I'm going to go shopping for a new blazer. This one has bad memories." I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Gerald shouting into his phone, calling the CEO, calling lawyers, calling anyone who might save him. Nobody was going to answer. The line was dead. 3 days later, the stock price of Whitmore and Associates had dropped 22%. The business press was publishing stories about internal management crisis and failed leadership. Trading had been halted twice. In a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding, the board had begged Richard Whitmore for one final meeting. They promised the obstacles had been removed. They swore the deal could be restructured. They pleaded with him to give them one more chance. Richard agreed. On one condition. The entire executive team, including the vice president and his daughter, had to be present. He wanted to hear their apology in person. The boardroom was packed. The air conditioning was on full blast, but everyone was sweating. Madison sat at the far end of the table, small and diminished. Her cream suit was gone, replaced by a drab gray dress. Her father wouldn't even look at her. The doors opened. Richard walked in, followed by Thomas, and then me. I walked in last, wearing a new suit. Black. Sharp. With gold buttons that caught the light. The collective gasp was audible. Madison's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide with shock. "We believed," the CEO began, his voice shaking, "that this meeting was to discuss reinstating the merger terms." Richard sat down at the head of the table. He didn't open his briefcase. He simply folded his hands. "I'm not here to merge," Richard said calmly. I'm here to make an offer for your assets. 30 cents on the dollar. 30 cents. Gerald shouted. That's robbery. We were at 4.2 billion. That was when you had competent leadership, Richard said. That was when you had Jennifer. Now you have chaos. He gestured toward me. Jennifer is now my advisor. She's informed me that without the Montana transition properly managed, your environmental liabilities are catastrophic. She's told me the Tokyo partners have lost confidence. She's explained that your company is essentially hollow. The room turned to look at me. The betrayal in their eyes was palpable. They expected loyalty from the person they had discarded. Jennifer, Madison whispered, how could you? You worked here for 15 years. I looked at her. I didn't feel hatred anymore. Just pity. She was a child who played with matches and was shocked the building burned down. I did work here, I said quietly. For 15 years, I followed every rule. I played the game perfectly. And you decided it wasn't enough. The vice president spoke up. We can fix this. Jennifer, come back. We'll terminate Madison. We'll give you her position. Just tell him to sign the original deal. The room held its breath. This was it. The offer of redemption. The return with a crown. I could have my old life back, but better. I looked at Richard. He raised an eyebrow, waiting. Are you ready to sign? He asked, playing along perfectly. I looked at the CEO. I looked at Gerald. I looked at Madison, who was staring at me with desperate hope. I smiled. It was the smile of someone who knows exactly where all the bodies are buried. I'm sorry, I said softly, my voice echoing in the silent room. She fired me. No deal. Richard stood up. You heard the lady.
The offer stands.
30 cents on the dollar. You have until 5 p.m. to accept, or we wait for the bankruptcy auction and buy it for pennies. He turned and walked toward the door. I followed him. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. The silence said everything. As we walked to the elevator, Richard handed me a file folder. Excellent work, Director, he said. I took the file. Thank you, Richard. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside and, for the first time in 15 years, I didn't check my reflection to make sure my buttons were straight. I knew they were perfect. We descended, leaving the wreckage on the 38th floor to collapse under its own weight. I finally, truly, exhaled.